Welcome to New Book News, celebrating writers whose books were published during the pandemic lockdown. This series receives funding from the Natalie and James Andrews Foundation. My name is Karen Schubert, and I'm the director of Lit Youngstown, a literary arts nonprofit in Northeast Ohio. We have programs for writers, readers, and storytellers, and I'd like to invite you to a workshop this Saturday led by Cleveland writer Anne Marie Kelly Harbaugh entitled Writing for Happiness. More information is available at lityoungstown.org. Thank you for joining us. I'm so pleased to feature these three writers today, and congratulations to them on their new books. We'll follow this evening's readings with a conversation about these books. Anne Kenniston is the author of several poetry collections and co-editor of the New American Poetry of Engagement, a 21st century anthology. Her poems have appeared in Yale Review, Gettysburg Review, Literary Imagination, and elsewhere. She teaches at the University of Nevada, Reno. Her new book is Somatic, published by Terrapin. Welcome, Anne.
So I'm going to go first, yes. So I just wanted to thank Karen and Lit Youngstown for this great series, and to my co-readers. It's just so nice to see some other poetry faces, and thanks to all who are tuning in as well. I wanted to give a little bit of an overview of my book, but I also thought we're all feeling a little stressed and sad. So I'm going to emphasize more the last section, which is a little more positive. So my book is called Somatic, and here it is. And it has 4 sections that explore a couple of things. One is the relationship between the ode and the elegy, so between poems of praise and poems of lamentation. I'm really interested in the way that those ideas overlap and relate. I'm also interested in the relationship between the bodily and the psychological, as the word somatic suggests. So the book has a range of different kinds of poems. It starts with some elegies for my mother. In the middle sections, it explores the ideas of psychological illness, especially hysteria. And then it ends with a series of odes to maybe things that aren't normally celebrated. So I'm going to read a poem or so each from the first few sections, and then, time permitting, a few more from the last section. So I'm going to start with the first book in the volume, called Opaque Elegy. And this poem has a reference to a camera obscura, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with. There was one in San Francisco I used to visit and just marvel at. You can, see all the people walking around through the camera, upside down and backwards. Opaque Elegy. And then my mother wasn't there, not translucent, then transparent, like the girl's hand in the movie. Nor was she diffused or reabsorbed by me or stored in condensed form for later, or a pure idea just past where I could see. I couldn't cram her into me, not a single fleck, splinter or sweet or painful memory that used to make me cry, nor fill the holes I'd made her make in me. There was no creaking deus ex machina or electronic gizmo to bring her back, though her absence was a thing, immaterial because gone, an idea of the concept of the absence of what was never solid or still, like looking into a camera obscura, which reproduces everything upside down, backward, and inconstantly, the image made of light, unreproducible unless someone chooses a single moment to preserve and undertakes the labor of transcribing it. And actually, I'm going to read one more of the elegy poems. That's more of a poem about childhood memories, kind of juxtaposed with some other images. Unlovable Elegy. There was a year or several when I thought my mother was punishing me for a flaw I couldn't see or way I'd hurt her. All the years since then, that error reproduced itself, changed form and object. And then I saw she'd done her best, but was so hurt. After my friend's divorce, her daughter grew so anxious she could hardly speak. The change, she called it, the transition. She quit her new job, and in the afternoons they sat together on the sofa or sometimes went to the movies. I thought I was unlovable, then unloved, which was also wrong. In the silent movie, my parents walk in laughing, my mother's hand on my father's shoulder, both of them so casually tender just a few years before he left her. Often the neutral scene is streaked with flame, but there must also exist a place that isn't harmed, like the salmon arrowing upstream through the roil of water pushing them back down. From the special viewing window, it seemed they hardly moved. So this next poem is moving into the poems about hysteria. And this poem describes, I got very fascinated with the research into the early treatments of hysteria and the fact that doctors kind of had no idea what to do about it. And there was sort of a famous exhibition of hysterics in Paris at the time that this poem takes place that the poem describes. Concordance Ode. Salpêtrière Hospital, Paris, 1880. On Tuesday afternoons, the bodies of mute or paralyzed hysterics twitched, then moaned on cue before a crowd, then all alone made love while mesmerized. A touch or pressure there could make asymptomatic girls convulse, then deliver each from all her symptoms. In photographs, a graceful girl in white raises an arm while falling. Her chemise is loose. The doctors clustered round, hysteria, the sheet they used to shroud, then touch that trembling. No protocol or rubric existed yet to translate what they saw, despite their patient searching for a key or at least a concordance to what they must have known they'd never fully master. Just some words to put beside those gestures, each almost theory, disproven by the newest batch of symptoms, till psychoanalysis became a curtain filled with holes and also light. Or else the truth existed somewhere else. Uncured, most girls remained locked in. A few got work in traveling shows, acting out their formerly uncontrollable symptoms before an audience that paid. Crowds still line up to watch the newest pretty girl impelled to go to sleep, then rise from bed, rigid, cataleptic, like the blurry girls in those old photos, her hands askew and stuck. And then the man, call him magician or doctor of throwing out into the dark, waves his hands to prove there is no transparent shelf or set of ropes, then covers, then makes her disappear till she emerges from the wings unharmed, which means it's time for everyone to applaud at that old trick made new, then surge into the aisles and go back home to dreams that, if remembered, gesture toward the same old mystery. In mine last night, I stood inside a ring of brambles hidden in wild grass, and then a staircase spiraled up, unanchored like the stars in fairy tales or myths. And I should have mentioned there's a series of famous paintings of the girls performing at Salpêtrière. So that was what I was sort of thinking of as I was writing that. I also have a series of poems in this volume that I call Arias. And these are poems narrated by a hysteric. I was especially interested in Anna O, who was sort of the most famous hysteric. And she, like many hysterics, was afflicted by aphasia, which means her speech was all choppy and didn't quite make sense. So that was something I was playing with in these poems, of sort of breaking syntax a little bit, speaking in that way. The poem is called Projected Aria, and it's sort of referring to the psychological notion of projection, where something, an emotion is projected onto something else, right? Or maybe onto a physical symptom. Projected Aria. I had no other home except this nest of bleach and broken bones, nor broken broken bow, the violin of me, unable not to slip in and out of recollected light, nor Philip, dab, or beach with scudding blocks of foam. Such a tender hatchling self I made by hand, my hands the lens and visible array, malformed, projected on some wall or empty sheet, hung down, thrown forward, stretching forth, a pantomime, old-fashioned border on which to perch, flat, not deep, because of hiding for so long, my clothes and limbs too wide to fit in any book, not girl, but wing ratio, the wind gets stuck in, then moves through, my hands manipulated by an outside thing or man, a pillow, then a cup for pretend water that fails to slake. So many loyalty oaths and reminiscences cast out, the pattern caught until it goes. And Freud famously said that hysterics suffer from reminiscences. So I am moving now, and I know I just have a few more minutes, to the final section, which are these ode poems. Okay. So this is a poem that was partly inspired by my reading back when I lived in Boston a long time ago. I was already fascinated by these kind of like psychological things and saints and stuff. Anyway, so there was an article about a little girl who was paralyzed in an accident, but a whole bunch of people, including her parents, thought that she had this kind of holy power to heal. So there's a description of her name was Audrey Santo, midway through the poem. Profusion Ode. Because my father could not walk, I dreamed we walked beside a double lake where marsh birds gathered in profusion, beautiful long-legged waders visible without binoculars. And then someone began to name them while the dusk collapsed around us, but slowly, delaying the dark, or I delayed it since I made this scene, inserting light, then bits of dark to fill the gaps. The girl who fell into an empty pool and broke her spine didn't become catatonic or brain dead, not a cripple, her mother thought, but a vessel made by God for other people's suffering, a wick or cipher, still and steadfast, no matter what she'd taken in. Most afternoons, the sick gathered outside her window to watch her on her special bed, thin-limbed, dressed all in pink, until they felt or thought they felt their pain lift away, then knelt all over the lawn to worship her. In my dream, my father thanked me, but I knew his pain continued, contained and hidden by his bones and flesh, like something he refused to give me out of mercy. Then we were driving through the dark, the two of us exhausted, until I found a stranger's house with people sleeping everywhere, on beds and chairs, the floor. Casually, he walked in and lay down and slept among them. This must be how I tally what I haven't lost yet, lifting each loved thing, then relinquishing it to mourn its loss, redundantly desiring sleep because I'm already sleeping. I had to wake for the dream to do its work. And so I woke and waited for the thin November sunlight to enter the yard while the leaves fell down in bunches and two pairs of jays, deep blue, oblivious, flashed between the trees. And let's see, what is our time limit here? I don't want to go over 5 minutes or, okay. All right, I have two more poems if that's, but I can also just read one. Okay, they're a little shorter. Okay, so this next poem is called Sycamore Ode. And the sycamore tree, I have one in my backyard that I stare at. It loses its bark in big sheets. So I was looking at it and thinking about it, and the poem refers to some kind of iconography about the sycamore. Sycamore Ode. Permit me this redundancy. I dug inside my bone to find the right material, a fastener or dark. Let me join me to myself right here and release my unremarkable heart. In myths, the fleeing girl becomes a tree, the sacred tree, the tree of patience. Again, the sycamore has spilled its bark over the ground. Here is where my invisible begins, at the scar or border, lip, my shore. My little wound has been sewn up with thread. And look, the birds are here, invisible but known. Geese pass over in the night. Here is where I was torn and then remade. It is both raw and smooth. And then the final poem is the last poem in the book. It's called Keatsian Ode. And I was thinking about Keats's To Autumn, which he wrote in celebration of the kind of abundance of summer/autumn as he was dying of tuberculosis. And there's especially those lines about the bees who are crammed, whose cells are o'ercrammed with the sweetness of summer. Keatsian Ode. Again, the world imposes itself, impure and redolent, filled with dimming light. Those greedy bees, aware and unaware of winter's imminence. As if to die were just to walk into the water fully clothed, the fabric endlessly absorbing that element because that is its purpose. Why not stand a little longer in the shallows, touching the abyss for practice, the clammy, almost bodily feel of whatever's in the dark container. The dying patriarch in movies rasps his gratitude and love, his ruined voice a signal the body is ready to be sloughed off. But in real life, the body's requirements come first and last. Suffering's what's left over. Little backwards math problem in which subtraction comes first. Unconveyable hand swirl in the air. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anne. Larry Smith is poet, fiction writer, biographer, and editor-publisher of Bottom Dog Press. His new book is Mingo Town and Memories, published by Bird Dog Publishing. Welcome, Larry.
I am unmuted. My hometown, Mingo Junction, Ohio. I was there this morning. We had gone down to visit an aging aunt of ours, and the cover of my book has two pictures of Mingo Town, one in 1930, one in 1980. So 50 years between, and we were right there this morning, looking down the street just as it was then. It's an economically depressed area. It's one of those steel mill towns, and I hope that people feel that about the book, that it's not just Mingo, it's all of those towns that have been suffering and denied and betrayed maybe in some way. I have a picture that my son Brian, this is going to be interesting. picture of Mingo town, and if you look at it for a while, it's both ugly and beautiful. It's both harsh and comforting to me and to those people who still connect with that town, Mingo Junction. I dedicated the book to them and to my English teacher, my 6th grade English teacher, God bless her, Mrs. Ruth Mersey, who expected us working class kids to write poems, read them and to write them. And I've not stopped since 6th grade and don't plan to. One of the things I noticed between all 3 of us writers is the use of voice and writing in another's voice, a persona. And I was pushed on to do that by Susan Patrone, who's a writer from Youngstown originally, and she has a book called The Heebie-Jeebie Girl, about a young girl who has insights, and it's all set in Youngstown, so it's appropriate to do it for lit Youngstown. In it, she has Youngstown speak. Youngstown narrates through parts of the book. The town speaks. And to me, that was a wonderful idea. I'd written about my hometown for all those years. Why not let my hometown speak now? So in many of these poems, Mingo speaks. And this one is an example. Mingo's history lesson. Oh, citizens of Mingo, let me share with you some history of our place. Before these steel mills and the railroads, before our ore ovens and coal mines, before the drilling for oil, before old man Potter and his son plotted our lots and streets for us, before pioneers and forts and old George Washington camping and drinking from our spring, before Chief Logan of the Mingo tribe hunted and fished along our short streams, there was just this clear water and green earth, native animals, trees, and plants. Close your eyes, let it rise before you, the past, reaching through the present. Later, when others arrived with splendid foreign names, came houses and gardens, neighborhoods and schools, churches and stores downtown and on street corners, the bottoms, the hills, all growing. People coupled and multiplied, mixed and spread, and I watched and smiled unjudging, happy to sense them renewed in the now. Winter's dried and withered rosebush, rooted in the fertile earth, blooms again each spring. So like Anne, I wanted to read some positive poems, and when I write about Mingo, it tends to be positive, but doesn't deny the reality of it. One of the places in Mingo that everybody connects with was a diner, the town diner. It's called Paddy's Diner. And I got so much response for this poem from people naming their favorite foods and who was in there, and then my mother worked in there. She was a cook, she was the waiter. So here we go. This is Mingo still talking. Paddy's Diner. Don't tell me it's just about cooking, and swallow that greasy spoon talk. It's a diner, for Pete's sake. Everybody knows that. You go there for breakfast special, bacon and eggs with a stack and toast, all served with coffee and conversation by a waitress who calls you sweetie and hun. The crowd changes, maybe neighbors, maybe people you went to high school with. If there's time, Joe, the owner cook, comes out to ask, how's everything? And how's your brother and sister? How they doing? Okay, the dinners aren't the best, except for Joe's fish on Fridays and Marie's meatloaf on Sundays and Bertha serving beef tips with noodles anytime. You learn what to ask for, and you always leave a tip in bills and no small change. Late at night, folks out drinking show up for a steaming plate of French fries and gravy, sparked with hot sauce and ketchup. Marie's mother makes those pies and those glazed Sunday donuts. Call it what you want. I know railroaders and truckers name it a little piece of heaven. Paddy's Diner. I got so many comments about French fries with gravy. I don't know if you've ever had that. Doesn't sound very healthy, but people loved it. And we'd go there including my wife's aunt that we visited. I did a reading in Mingo on the street after this book came out, so we'd be outside, we had masks on, and a gathering of people stood. I mean, you could stand on Main Street, there's nobody driving down the street much anymore. And this is a poem I'd written some time ago called Rocky's Junkyard. Otto's farm grows junk cars, dead seeds in the mud. 3 cinder block buildings handle the trade, while the dark entrails of engines hang from pulley chains. Tires, radiators, axles stacked to the roof. Salvage, they call it now. Inside the main building, a barrel stove warms Rocky's wife, who takes calls and works the books. Rocky just grins and grabs his gloves, moves steady into the cold. Day and night now, the cars burn in winter light. And the funny thing about reading it on the street was a guy was standing there in the audience of, a dozen. And I said, "You look familiar. Who are you?" He said, "I'm Rocky." So it was not the original Rocky, it was Rocky's son. And he said, "Yeah, my dad likes that poem." So there you go. It was a union town. Things have changed a lot with unions and politics as well. So this is some memories of the union town idea of the place. Well, not just an idea, a reality. Once a month for decades, he brought home the Catholic Worker, folded gently and laid on kitchen table, where it would be picked up, read, folded, and laid back again. A fabric in their lives. Like the Catholic missals that she kept in rubber bands folded in her dresser drawer. He spoke little about the mill, except of friends, left it at the mill gate, where others stopped to drink away their bitterness, while he climbs the hills to home. Their children were taught by Sisters of Charity, Franciscans, sharing Christ's caring for the poor, by having them bring cans of food each month. At some secret signal near recess, they all would gently roll them forward on the wooden floors, 20 cans of green beans, corn, tomato sauce, reaching the blackboard with sweet laughter as the young sister feigns surprise, then bends to gather them up, and each and all bow their heads in thanks. So I steal my wife's story. She was a Catholic girl and I was a public, and this is a ritual they used to do, is to bring the canned goods, and then poor sister, she never knew when it was going to happen. They just roll them up the aisle there. But the charity idea is what I like. This is a kind of mythic poem. I think so much is mythic, maybe at the age that I am. But when I think of the rituals that were part and still are part of that town, I was home and my aunt, my wife's aunt, was to sing in a funeral, and it was snowing. So I took her down and I went to the funeral of somebody I didn't even know, but it was like, I liked watching the ritual and coming together. This is called The River. And we went down, boys and girls together, in our school clothes, along the smelly creek all the way to the river. Brambles and stones beneath our feet, we passed rails and mill gates. And there we stood, looking out in silence at that great river, too wide to swim across, though some might have tried and drowned too young. And our teacher stepped in, allowing her skirt to rise to her hips like a cloud with her inside. And lifting her arms, she beckoned one by one to her side, where she blessed aloud our baptism, not to God, but to the waters, and we the fish that lived inside, and it inside of us. Forever and forever, she said simply, you are one. And some laughed for joy, and some bowed their heads and cried. Now there the imagination kind of comes in and takes over a little bit. But if it exists in your mind, it exists. I don't want to take too much more time. I'm going to read this one because it's good to share with other writers and poets, you know. It's called Why I Read Books. It's also why I write books. I am home from college, resting on our back porch in a webbed lawn chair, when Dad comes through on his way to the garage. I look up from my book, Anderson's Winesburg, Ohio, and he stops, takes a breath, then asks it, "Son, do you ever think of doing something instead of just reading a book?" I am struck, hard swallow, and shrug a simple smile. Dad is a railroader, always finding work, and I, his pathetic son right now, waiting to find a summer job. He disappears down the steps, but returns 5 minutes later for something he's forgotten. Ready now, I enter the house. Wait, Dad, can I speak? He turns from the sink. Yeah, what's up, boy? I am 20, yet glad to be his boy. Dad, I want to answer you. He nods, and facing each other, I try. I don't know if I can say it right, but some of these books, well, they have honestly saved me and kept me going. We stand in that great quiet of two men sharing a felt connection, like a prayer offered and accepted. We are not the hugging Smiths, yet we both feel held. That's a true moment, you know, those moments that stay in your life. I remember one time my dad praised me, you know, I was like, "You've always found a way to, you know, to make money, to pay the bills, and you've always grown." And I thought, wow, I'm going to remember that. Let me see if I read one more. This is the country store. There's a store down there called Pesta's Country Store. It's been around since the 1930s. It's a Pesta's Italian country store, maybe I should say. So there's a story to it, and I'll end with this one. Outside the town's country store stand two girls in high school jackets, their sports names scrawled across the back. Laughing at the greeting of cats, they enter, sidling their way back past stacks of canned goods and chips, pastas and plates, mugs, bottles of Coke and maple syrup, stacks of hometown t-shirts, rich smells of fresh baked bread and flowers, coffee aroma mixed with fresh cut cheese, all of it pulling them to the meat counter. The tall one stops, leans toward her sister, and says, "Remember now, she just lost her son in Afghanistan." The younger one nods, looks up into the face of the older woman. "Oh, Mrs. Murphy, we've come for Mom's chickens." The older woman smiles. "Oh, if it isn't Cheryl and Marie. So good to see you girls." Names form a sacred bond here. "How's your sister Margaret?" Cheryl asks. "Oh, she's okay," the woman lies, not wanting to spoil their day, like that fish that someone left out. "Well, I've got your chickens already wrapped," she says, eyeing their fresh faces. At the counter, she touches each girl's hand. "You two be careful out there," she says softly into their eyes. "You know how much we need you." A bell chimes as they exit the door. So that's some of my Mingo Town. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Larry. Diane Wald is an award-winning poet and novelist. Her books of poetry include Lucid Suitcase, The Yellow Hotel, and Wonderbender, and her novels are Gillyflower and My Famous Brain. Her new book is The Warhol Pillows, published by Finishing Line Press. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you. I want to, first of all, show you the cover of my book because I don't know if you can see it. I'm not seeing myself too well, but anyway, This is the cover. It's a photo collage done by my brother. And the interesting thing is that I've had this picture for more than 30 years. And I always thought if I ever had exactly the right book for that cover, that's what I wanted. And it finally came together. So I was very happy about that. So I'm going to read you a few poems from the Warhol Pillows. This one's called Snow on a Velvet Cloche. I'm about to see the film everyone else has seen. No, it is not death. Death is not in this story. I'm not about to behold the birds of my body wander into night, forgetting about their wings, ambling stupidly on matchstick legs, with their rhinestone eyes rolling. No, most of those little birds can still fly. I go to the movies. I wait in my seat without removing hat or scarf. I wait, in fact, feeling a little cold. My fingers cling to a paper cup of coffee like a beggar's to her bowl. The theater's full. The people around me are all in love. The women's hair electrified from their showers taken before lovemaking or after. And the men are all gentle with them, leaning over to perfect each laugh they share, to tame the hair, to cover each hand, to inhale. The film is a classic I have always missed. I know its melodies. Like many, I have aped the dress of its actress. Sometimes I hear the dialogue just as I fall to a dream, and I fall then like the most brittle of trees, to a dream that is classic and ill-remembered. Today I will finally see the film. The film is not love. It is not remembrance. This particular print has aged. I know that, though the film has not started. A certain rasp and hesitation, an endearing lack of synchronization. These things and the inevitable grainy silk of faces washed overboard. For this I am waiting. The happiness of waiting is mine. I'm a living lace of nerves, perspiring now as the curtain starts to slide and the lights grow dimmer and the lovers around me loosen their embraces. The coffee is forgotten. The hat slides from my ears. I am afraid now. I am so afraid. Alone. That's it. I'm the only one here. The only one here on the ceiling, flying solo. Over the tender exit, an oval blue light glows. So now I'm going to read three short prose poems. I like prose poems because they're relaxing to me somehow, and sometimes they're funny. So I'll take a little break. This one's called "You're There." Again in the dream, it's William Hurt. Again in this vest, this time buttoned high. And ha, I say, I know what you stand for this time. It's your name. Something's hurt me. That's it, right? And also I think to myself very cunningly, I also know how he looks like somebody else. The character in that movie, for example, and even he no doubt stood for somebody else. So I'm in no danger of this being really William Hurt. Although I do think he's a wonderful actor, but it isn't him in his dream. And I lean up against this isn't him in the dream and put my arms around him, and he's a little surprised, but he holds me so tenderly, unexpectedly. I guess I didn't think he was like that. And he's very, very glad to see me. And he has this kind of wonderful, unstated, humorous, accepting knowledge of me, and it makes me happy. He's listening, listening, listening. And it's just about everything I ever wanted, but there's more. There's a reading in the dream, a poetry reading at a great bookstore where everyone sits around a huge round table, eating what looks like some kind of spinach tart. And coffee, of course, very good dark coffee, maybe hazelnut. And anyhow, they love me there. And the proprietor of the store, a dark little man who also looks like somebody else, I can't think who, says they've been waiting for me for 100 years. That's really good, I think, and I'd look all around. William Hurt isn't there anymore, but you are. This one is called My undertaker wears a sweet cologne. My undertaker wears a sweet cologne. I mean, I like it. He gets up close to you, real close. He has to. It's his job. You know, he's probably going to say you belong underground, but it's not the man's fault, not at all. Better him than some others I can think of. And if you're not dead, you don't have to listen to him anyway, but just in case. The only advice he ever gave me was never give a dog a tomato, but he didn't explain why. He looks like the kind of guy who has a falsetto. Not that he uses it, just that he has one. And if you ask him too many questions, he will tell you he's been exhausted by the surreal that day and will have to get back to you. And he will. He's a gentleman after all, and I suspect a bit sad, but not depressed. I glimpsed the inside of his Audi filled with clouds. Last year, he fell in love with and married one of his clients. He's a great guy. And this one is based on a true story. It's called Don and the Family Matter. Mother was a registered nurse on private duty. In the town next door, where Richard Nixon once lived for a time, she spent many months caring for a man who lived in a big ritzy house with his wife and a small beige dog, which Mother described as Barky. Instead of getting well or dying, as most of Mother's patients did, this man kept getting sicker. The doctors ordered, as they are fond of saying, every conceivable test, but they could not find out why the man wouldn't get well. His name was probably Don. Of course, this was nearly 50 years ago or more. There's nothing on the internet. Anyway, it turned out he was being slowly poisoned by a family member. It put him in a wheelchair before anyone solved the conundrum. I was told he kept a silver pitcher of water by his bed and wore plaid Bermuda shorts when he was able. Not sure if he played golf before he got ill, but probably. Did the little beige dog jump up in anyone's lap? Also not sure. The wife was not the guilty party, but it was a family matter. A nephew, perhaps. Or perhaps it is always easier to blame the nephew in a town where Richard Nixon used to live. So back to serious poems. This one's called L as in Labyrinth. Black nights, white peonies, and the olives, Castelvetrano, Mantequilla, Cerignola. It may never happen to me again, that which I loved so much. The sun set starting early, violet pink outside the doctor's office window. He knows people I know, yet somehow I trust him with my secrets, as if we were lovers, or even as if we were strolling Rhode Island again, like two people who could not die. July. Swarms of dark midges still swirling in the rain. A bee so heavy with pollen it bends the blossom down. A circle of sparrows hopping on Dinner Street, pecking the tossed tortilla. Princess Diana and Queen Elizabeth roses positioned on opposite sides of the garden to avoid confrontation. On the front seat of the Mazda, an empty wallet, just where you left it full. And there's two more. This is the title poem, The Warhol Pillows. I wanted the Warhol Pillows for a cover too, but you can't get that kind of copyrighted material unless you're a millionaire. So the Warhol Pillows. In Spain, in Altea, you broke down. Why I remember this today, twirling in the gallery full of floating helium-filled silver pillows, isn't really amazing. And after you take my picture, you and I have a photo strip taken by the machine in the basement of the Warhol Museum. And lo and behold, we are happy. our own true selves, our radiant faces crowded together in black and white, show a fierce youth hidden by the colors of passing days. Never am I happier than when surrounded by silver pillows. Never are you better than behind your camera, recording my bliss, honing in on the unseen nugget of my being that without the camera you cannot glimpse or touch, and who knows why. In Altea you broke down and credited me with salvation, but today it's Andy who plays Savior as we wait for ourselves on the concrete steps in this fashionable city where everything shines with a clip from some honest and crazy film, where people say just what they mean without realizing what they are doing. And finally, a poem for 2020. This winter, as soon as one salmon velvet petal drifts away from the peace rose in the side garden, I understand that this time the seasons are really changing. I am married to a man as tall as the Empire State Building and as wide. When we go out, he takes my arm as if to say, "Don't go without me." We're all going this time. The earth groans under the weight of our folly. Leaves, lives, liberties, shifted off balance, teetering in grief like swallows fallen ill mid-air, surprised that anything could stop them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane. I'm really looking forward to this conversation about these books. And Anne, would you be willing to start us off?
Yeah, I actually have several questions, but I'm trying to figure out where to begin. But maybe we could start with both of your poems use colloquial language, but they also twerk it. And I wonder if you guys could talk a little bit about using colloquial language and what makes a poem, if it's got colloquial language in it, what turns it into a poem, and what are effective ways for you to use kind of more conversational speech.
Well, I did a book with a former classmate on Mingo Junction, one of those photo books where you put old photos and you have little chapters. You don't not so much writing as it is collecting photos. And to do that, it was the people of Mingo Junction who came down and shared those with us. Their albums, their journals, and so it brought my ears back to hearing that voice of that town. And I, hope that that's how those poems come across. If I'm going to write a book about Mingo Junction, I write it like Mingo Junction would talk. You know what I mean? So there was a sense of being authentic, direct. I mean, in Mingo, they'll tell you if they think something is wrong with you. Like, why are you wearing that dress? You don't want to wear that. You know what I mean? They'll just tell you. So that had to be a part of it. Also, I wanted to engage those people. And, poetry doesn't necessarily bring a crowd. And yet here's a book about a town, and my poetry started in that town. So there was a drive to make that connection, and that's why that the language is. But I would say generally I write that way, not always in that voice, but in a sincere, direct way. James Wright lived 20 minutes south of us in Martins Ferry. And when I learned that James Wright, a poet near me, I was in high school, and I thought, oh my God, you could write poetry? You can actually do that, So he was an inspiration to me too.
Yeah, I love listening to people, so I think all my life that's where I get a lot of ideas for poems and also steal a lot of lines, a lot of language. And it seems a lot more natural to me. Like the poem I read about the man who was being poisoned was actually, a lot of it was taken from the way my mother used to tell that story, you know, about the little dog that she called Barky, and various things that happened to her. And you know, I kind of funnel it all through my head and it comes out jumbled up in a different way. But I just love listening to people speak, and I frequently jot things down and use them later.
Interesting. Yeah. So it seems like both of you are interested in kind of like a kind of accuracy in what you're getting down.
That there's music in those
Mhm.
voices. That there's a poetry too. There's a poem in there of my dad, how he would teach me things about work. They're almost like Zen koans, you
Mhm.
know. Just let the shovel do its work, you know. Uh, and that's in the language, and it's just as concise and uh, beautiful as a poem by Frost.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, maybe I can follow up by asking the question I sort of started with before I heard you guys read it in person, which had to do with imagery, because I think, again, both of your poems are really reliant on specific images, but they use them really differently. So I don't know if you have stuff to say about how that's, if you feel like your poems begin in images, how central an image in a broad sense. So either a particular object or something that's being transformed through the imagination.
I was talking with my wife's aunt this morning. We get up early, you know, like 6:30 or something. And I was telling her I wrote a poem last night because I heard a line, and that's what started that poem. And a lot of my poems, it's just some line that then says you need to write a poem about this, you know. And Diane, I loved your funeral director's poem and his sense, you know, that this was just perfect. And the prose poem is the right form for that. You know, it allows you to be playful. It allows you to jump, move around, and the voice in that. I don't know if that's your voice, but it's a voice that makes that happen. But the image is what stays. I guess I got French fries with gravy. You know, that's not a very inventive image. It's just the bluntness of it.
Yeah,
But I
whereas
think your poems, Anne,
Yeah.
are invested in images and a little like a reality around those.
You
yeah,
know, Larry, it's interesting. I'm kind of blowing one of my questions here, but by the time you get to me, maybe I'll think of something else. But one of my questions was about imagery and the incredible images in a lot of the poems in your book, and two of them that I pulled out to mention today. You actually read those poems, and the
Yeah.
images are, while the dark entrails of the engines hang from pulley chains,
Oh my God.
blew me away. And the other one, allowing her skirt to rise to her hips like a cloud with her inside.
Oh yeah.
Those are wonderful images. You know, they're so real, but they take off.
Well, when my grandkids go to Mingo Junction, they always want to see Rocky's junkyard because it's a huge. It used to be a cornfield, just a huge field with junked cars, rusting, and not well hidden either. You know, and so when you go there, that's what the images just stick with you. And yeah, I found the words for that entrails thing. It just seemed right.
and just that you're using simile in those cases to go beyond the description, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Whereas Diane, I feel like your poems, some of them at least, are really built on like juxtaposing images, like combining different moments and places and physical things, like the one about the plush hat. Yeah, in the movie theater.
Oh
So
yeah,
it seems like you're using images really differently, like through juxtaposition more. I don't know. That was my sense reading them.
yeah. I think that's true. I like to collect things and mix them up. I mean, it's a little bit like making physical art. you know,
Mm.
you can use this collection of different images or things that you found. It's very thing centered, I feel, and build something else, build a third thing out of all of that. So I think that's what happened in the movie poem. I'm not sure, but yeah, I do find that I construct things out of images a lot of times.
Yeah, and I mean, almost a little bit of a surrealist vibe I'm getting.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
and if you saw my previous book, which was called The Pairs, they're like mostly surreal poems.
Oh,
So
really?
there's that side of me, and there's this side of me. But it was
Yeah.
sort of based on the content, based on what it was going to call out of me. Yeah, and I enjoyed your poems. I enjoyed that atmosphere that you create around each one.
Okay.
Well, I was also, I mean, I can just keep asking some questions. I was also just struck in our time of, isolation that both of you have poems that are about people being together in a group. And I don't know if there's a question in that, but that was just something I thought about sort of depicting characters and depicting people gathering. So the people in the diner, the people in the movie theater, the couples in the movie theater. And I imagine you wrote those poems before COVID, but they're, yeah, especially kind of reverberating the way you watch a movie and it's like, whoa, those people are getting so close to each other. Like, what's going on? Right. Yeah, but is that something that you think about as sort of like depicting characters or depicting the way people interact with each other? I mean, maybe not. It's just something that struck me.
You know, there's a bar up here called the Blind Perch Bar. Now, how could you not want to write a poem about that? The Blind Perch Bar. And in the poem, I take us in there, and it's a mafia bar, of course, and the whole, but it all came from that expression, the blind perch.
Mm-hmm.
So things will prompt those poems, as you know, and sometimes it's language, sometimes it's an image, sometimes it's a memory, or just the connection. I particularly in the Mingo book, I was working on connecting with people. Something I think we're all going to have to work on
Right.
in the future, and right now, and for a while.
Yeah. Just the way people make communities in these kind of public spaces, I guess. Yeah.
I hadn't really noticed that, what you mentioned about people in groups, but now that I think of it, a lot of my poems happen in dreams, and there are usually larger populations in my dreams than there are in my real life. So I think that's why, it might seem like there's a group there.
I remember talking to Craig Golenich, whose book we published called Old Brown, about James Brown, and I said, "You're always writing in somebody else's voice." And he said, "Of course, I'm so tired of my own voice. You know, I've heard myself so much. You know." So he takes on the whole character, and his book is scary. It's so full of James Brown and John Brown, and it's just I would rather do that than write another "Here's Larry Again" poem. You know.
Yeah. Well, that was something I definitely found with my book, just that like writing as this, hysterical girl
Yeah.
allowed me to put words together in a really different way.
Yeah.
To allow another part of me to speak. So I liked doing that. And I definitely was thinking of the aria as a kind of like hysterical. I mean, it's actually been called a hysterical form, this sort of extremity of opera, as the woman, sort of sing shrieking. So Yeah, so that was really interesting for me to kind of enter into that other, not just another voice, another voice and another personality.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to thank you all so very much for sharing your work with us and for this engaging conversation. And I wish you the best with these very fine books. And I hope we cross paths again. Thank you again.
Sure we will.